Joining us on the line is Olivia Enos, Senior Policy Analyst in the Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation. Obviously, the big news of the week, and really what should be the big news of the year, it's going to be completely ignored, is the fact that China just completely ended freedom in Hong Kong. Olivia, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
So obviously, we are too busy worrying about whether people are properly mask wearing in the United States and or dancing in front of cops in giant crowds to worry about the destruction of all freedom for 7 million people living in Hong Kong. But maybe you can give a little bit of history of the situation here. I was told in the 1990s that basically there would be two systems in China. One would be Hong Kong, which would be a free city, that when the British left, that they were going to guarantee the safety of the citizens of Hong Kong. And now it appears that China has basically just declared that Hong Kong is a purely Chinese city. It will be ruled by communist Chinese tyrants. What's the story here?
Well, it's clear that authorities in Beijing have reneged on their promises. Hong Kongers were supposed to be guaranteed the one country, two systems framework that they agreed to in 1997 when the British handed Hong Kong back over to China. That was supposed to last until 2047. Now we're seeing a premature end to that one country, two systems framework that has ensured and preserved freedom for Hong Kongers. This is a serious, serious misstep by Beijing and one that the world should watch very closely. I think that the U.S. Congress was very swift to respond to Beijing's transgressions last year when we saw them introducing the extradition bill that sparked 2019 protests. Hopefully, we will be just as swift to respond. Of course, we saw Secretary Pompeo decertifying Hong Kong, saying that it's no longer sufficiently autonomous from Beijing to merit separate treatment under U.S. law. But we have a lot of latitude to define what that's going to look like. And hopefully the next steps are put in place not only to hold Beijing accountable, but also to preserve liberty and freedom for the Hong Kong people.
So, Olivia, what exactly can the West do at this point? Because obviously the West is not going to get into a military conflict over Hong Kong. It seems like the only tools at our disposal are economic. We've tried some of those tools in the past. Beijing doesn't really seem to care all that much, at least not enough to restore the freedom of the people of Hong Kong. So was the big problem here that this was abandoned in the first place? The British never should have abandoned Hong Kong in the first place? And what exactly can the West do at this point to try and restore some semblance of freedom for the people of Hong Kong?
Absolutely. So, when Secretary Pompeo reported to Congress that he was decertifying Hong Kong's special status, they outlined a number of areas where the U.S. has historically cooperated with Hong Kong. And we have a lot of latitude in where we sort of pull back and push forward. And so I think the U.S. government is currently looking at the various areas where we can continue to cooperate in ways that would help the Hong Kong people. Other things that we can do is in seeking to hold authorities in Beijing accountable, the administration has already issued visa bans against anonymous Chinese officials for the role they played in undermining rule of law there. But we can certainly start looking at financial sanctions as well. And beyond that, I think we should be sort of ready at the helm in the event that Beijing takes an even worse step, perhaps even engaging in some form of military intervention. And we should be prepared to extend priority to refugee status to those Hong Kongers who are in need.
So what should this tell us about our future relations with China? The United States has always had a largely divided mind about China. On the one hand, China has been seen as a geostrategic opponent, a country with very aggressive intent, particularly in that area of the world, and seeking imperialistic takeovers of surrounding nations, including Taiwan. On the other hand, the United States has been very generous in its trade relationship with China for many, many years. The United States has always believed or has historically believed that if we just drew them into the family of nations, they would somehow moderate. That's obviously been untrue. The Xi administration over there, the Xi regime, has now basically entrenched itself for the foreseeable future in Vladimir Putin-style fashion. This is a full-on dictatorship with no chance of changing anytime in the near future. How should the United States be approaching China more broadly, not just on the Hong Kong issue?
Well, I think the Wall Street Journal editorial board got it right in their op-ed this morning when they said that, we now know, and we've known, frankly, for a long time, that we can't trust Beijing at its word. But one thing that we do know for sure is that the Chinese Communist Party is in any sort of foreign policy relationship for its own ends, for its own glory. And everything that the Chinese government does is to elevate and stabilize the role of the Chinese Communist Party. So if there are ways that we can actively seek to undermine the Chinese Communist Party's ability to engage in violations of human rights and in undermining freedom, we should do so. So I think that there's a strong need to use targeted financial measures, whether that's in the context of human rights violations, dealing with the severe human rights violations we're hearing out of Xinjiang, even, to the tune of forced sterilization, forced abortion. It looks like these may be early warning signs of genocide beyond the internment of 1 to 3 million Uyghurs in the political re-education facilities today. But we've also got to think about that in the trade context. How can we use targeted financial measures to punish Chinese individuals and entities that are, engaging in intellectual property violations and whatnot? We have to continue to be tough on China and call them out, not only on security grounds, but on human rights grounds as well, because we've seen what has taken place in Hong Kong, and that a threat to liberty is a threat to stability all over the globe.
And so, Olivia, you mentioned the possibility of the United States offering refugee status to members of the population of Hong Kong who want to come here. Has there been any movement by the administration on that? Because there does seem to be sort of a bipartisan push to grant people the ability to immigrate here from a country where the flag of freedom is the flag of the United States. I mean, they've been flying these flags in protest, American flags, trying to generate sympathy in the United States, but also recognizing that the Western systems of government are better than the Chinese system of government.
Congress has really stepped up in this regard. We've seen several moves on Capitol Hill proposing some forms of priority to refugee status or other forms of immigration relief to Hong Kongers, whether or not they were involved in the pro-democracy movement or they're members of the business community. I really think priority to refugee status should be extended to all Hong Kongers as a member of a politically persecuted group directly targeted by authorities in Beijing. I think this is a strong move, and hopefully it will gain support and traction at the executive branch level. But, Congress has historically played a wonderful role in elevating human rights issues and often putting the pressure on administrations in order to act. And so hopefully they'll continue to do so.
Olivia, senior policy analyst in the Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation. Really appreciate your time and your insight. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben.